Hello, everyone.
Hello. So, I heard you all care about flight. So we'll sort of get started. This is me, David Coulson. I'm a gameplay programmer. I've been working on this flight model for quite a while. And this is John Crew, the vehicle pipeline director.
Yep.
You're in charge of vehicles, I guess.
The vehicle pipeline is obviously a huge thing. So I'm sat there trying to get all the ships from concept to release and all the post-release support and all those systems that work with vehicles.
Yep. So I think we'll just dive straight into it. This is what matters to everyone, is what's next for flight in Star Citizen. And I think since, say, 2.6, we haven't really had what we wanted out of this. We could do a lot better, and we sort of have this this vision for how we want it. And so we've sort of gone back to 2.6, and we've looked at what we had in 3.0, and we're like reevaluating everything and thinking about what is the best way to bring the experience that is the most interesting for everyone. And so if we look at what that kind of means, we want you to really feel the ship. Currently flying around, the ships kind of feel quite similar between a lot of them, and they have so much acceleration that you can't really feel all of the workings of your ship, and that's really not what we want. And to go into that, we really want this system to be kind of reactive to what's going on inside your ship. So it's not as simple as just flying and then you feel your ship's handling and then you do your combat and whatever. We want you to feel what's happening inside the ship's systems, like the fuel and the power and everything, and that should really feed into what's happening in the flight model. And currently we just don't really have anything like that. And hopefully this will get us this more deep, interesting experience that changes between different ships. So we want it so that you fly this one ship and you have to fly in a certain way, and that's the way to win in that ship. And then going to a different ship, you might have to change your approach. And so hopefully what we got is going to sort of get us toward that. We want to kind of going back to the reactive thing, I think that's really important because we really want the thrusters to have like a thrust strength, and then if we can change that, we can kind of work toward changing the handling of the ship while you're flying, which is something that we've never really had before. So what we're about to show you, not final. So you all know, I'm sure you probably do already, you can play this flight model in the Drake Virtual Training Facility downstairs in the AT&T room. And we want your feedback, and we want to sort of get to the correct flight model that is best for everyone. So this is not final, and I hope you enjoy it anyways. But we'll work with us and we'll get it to what we want it to be.
Yeah, so video is obviously very hard to get across the feeling of flight, so we're going to talk in depth about a lot of stuff here. So let's start at the bottom and work our way up.
Yeah, we'll start with controls, I think right at the bottom of the flight system. You want to talk about the throttle?
You may have noticed on those videos there we've changed the way the throttle works. You have direct control over your ship now, and that works at a much wider range of speeds. It's sort of the feedback we've had from people today, like they've noticed that change. So let's have a look at it in action.
So if you look on the left side of the screen, there's now, or left side of the HUD, you now have a speed bar, and you're moving your speed up and down by pressing W and S, say for mouse and keyboard. We'll get to HOTAS in a second, promise me. But yeah, so as you can see, like if you press W and then you immediately let go, the ship stops accelerating. That's unlike what we had previously, where you had this kind of defined speed range, and you press W and S to move the target speed up and down that range. But we don't have that range anymore, right? So the speed just moves up and down depending on whether you're accelerating your thrusters or not. And it seems kind of subtle, but But I promise you, this is a really significant change, and it changes how you're going to have to fly. But there's another important part to this, which I haven't quite got to. The dot on the speed bar there is the target velocity that the coupled mode flight is trying to get you toward, right? So if you turn, your speed is going to change. Your forward speed is going to change from that dot and what that dot is supposed to be. And coupled mode essentially amounts to moving your speed toward that dot. It wants your forward velocity to be held at that dot. So you turn in coupled mode, and you'll see that IFCS will automatically bring your speed up to that dot. This doesn't happen in decoupled mode, and that's one of the big differences between the two modes, is you get this I guess more Newtonian pushing like asteroids kind of flight out of decoupled, which is not coupled.
So, looking at the other side of the HUD there, we've got this sort of thrust capacity bar. This allows you to finely control your thrust power, lets you manage your accelerations. So this sets how strong your thrust is in all axes when IFCS is trying to move your ship, and it gives you that fine control. So if you don't want to go at full tilt, you can just bring it down, and then you're going to move at a much slower rate. You want to get it faster, just scroll it back up again. So we obviously talked about mouse and keyboard. Let's have a look at HOTAS.
Yeah, so the way this works in HOTAS is if you're using a not bidirectional throttle, which you can do, thrusting forward will increase the amount of acceleration that your thrusters are giving. So you can hear that as you push your thrust forward, you're going to get more acceleration out of your ship, and that speed is moving further up the bar, right? And then if you want a retro thrust, you have the retro thrust on a button, and this kind of acts a bit like space brake. So you would press this button, and you're going to have your retro thrusters fire and pull that speed back again. Here's another shot of this. You can hear the thrusters increasing in strength as you move that HOTAS up. The other option here is to have a bidirectional thrust. So you can actually have zero thrust effectively be the center setting on a throttle if you have a throttle that has like an indent in the middle, and then you can pull back to go backwards or fire retro thrust and push forward to fire forward thrust. This is kind of significant because previously if you pulled back on your throttle, it would move that target speed down, which would make you slow down. But that's actually not what's happening now. If you pull back on your HOTAS, you're effectively killing thrust on the main thrusters, and you'll carry on traveling at that speed, but you're not going to slow down unless you press that retro button. So I think let's talk about
Afterburner.
Yeah, go on.
Specifically AB2, that's that second stage of Afterburner. So what have we done with it?
Well, it's gone.
It's gone. So thought I'd make a few people happy. No longer do you just hold shift to get up to cruise speeds. There's that weird bit in the middle where you're like, is it going? Is it not going? Oh, no, it's going. Oh, I don't want to go there.
Yeah.
So no more scaling your accelerations back. No more kicking you out when you move. So that's Afterburner. What about Boost?
Well, Boost is now correctly called Afterburner. So yeah, now you press shift, and you will essentially you're firing boost, right? So you're going to get more acceleration out of the ship. And this is not related to going to cruise speeds. This is literally the same as boost was, right? You're going to do this, and you're going to feel more acceleration out of your ship. Now there has been a previous issue with boost where it's overused, shall we say, with some people taping it down. I've heard this is a thing that happens. We know about you guys taping boost down just for benefits. So we wanted a consequence to using boost. So we're actually going to get back to that in a little bit because we need to go over something else first. So go on. So how do we cruise now? Now we've got rid of AB2. Well, you literally just freely accelerate up to cruise speeds in any direction, coupled or decoupled. So let's have a look at it in action. So here in the Aurora, I'm just holding W at this point, accelerating past. You see, I'm going to go past the SCM speed, and the ship just keeps accelerating. Now, obviously, in coupled, this is happening with just accelerating forward. But you can actually do this with any of the strafe axes as well, and you can do this in decoupled. You literally just accelerate for as long as you need, and you go up to the top the top speed of the ship, which is pretty much the same as the cruise speeds we had previously. Though there is another change that's kind of important here. When you go past the safe maneuvering speed of the ship, coupled will start limiting your angular velocity, and this is kind of something we had a while ago in cruise. And this is kind of a feature of coupled because if you're above those speeds and your thrusters are just not quite strong enough to move you around, you're just going to drift for miles and miles and miles. So this is kind of like, you could think of it as a safety feature of coupled that's saying, hey, you're not really going to be able to practically turn at these speeds because you're going to drift so much. So I'm going to limit your turn speed to try and keep you from drifting. Now, if you turn on decoupled, this is not actually the case.
Yep, so where are you going? So we're going as sort of, you can see the target velocity dot there. I'm in decoupled, I'm going all over the place. If you were to go back into coupled at this point, you're going to have a huge amount of slide. Obviously, you've got that huge velocity going there. But yeah, they're two different flight modes. They behave very differently. You don't have to use both, you can use one or the other.
I think it's really cool as well that, previously getting into cruise speeds in decoupled was kind of a pain because you'd have to be going in a perfectly straight line. But because we've removed that restriction, this is just no longer a problem. Decoupled works so much better like this. So you might wonder, if you're just flying around, what if you don't want to go up to these speeds? What if you don't want to be at these speeds where you're having your angular velocity limited, and it's kind of a pain to manage that, especially if you're a more inexperienced pilot. So what we have is a speed limiter, and this is a toggle, right? So you can press this button, and it will hold your ship into a maneuvering speed that is going to keep you from sliding too much. And you could think of this almost like a safety. We call it Scm Safety. So we'll just have a look at how that works. So you're traveling at a cruise speed, and you press the Scm Safety button, and that will bring up these two triangles on your speed bar, and this is going to hold you inside a certain speed range where we can pretty much make sure that you're not going to drift too much. And we'll reevaluate those speeds for all the ships to kind of keep you from sliding too much and keep you from getting into territory where the ship's just very difficult to control. And so this is on by default. You can obviously change that in the settings. And we expect that the more experienced pilots will be able to fly with this off, and they can sort of edge up to the higher speeds and not lose control too much.
Yeah, it's not like hard cap. Like it's a range of velocity and speed. You're still going to slide in those ranges. Yeah,
you just slide less when you're going slower. So
we talked at the start a few goals we want to do. So a big one of this is how do we make this system reactive and systemic? What does that mean? So we've fully integrated Ifcs and thrusters into all the other ship systems. They have item 2.0 like all the rest. That means they now behave with power, fuel, heat. They all interconnect with all the other items in the ship. Previously, there were sort of two separate systems in the ship, and never the two would meet. That's not the case now. So another thing we want to talk about is having a grounding for how these thrusters work in reality, which we can go over.
Yeah, so what we wanted to do with thrusters is base them on some real-life fiction that we can sort of take forward into the future. And that was these things called Vasimir engines, which I can barely remember what they stand for. I think it's Variable Specific Impulse Magnetoplasma Rocket, that's what it is. Yeah. So this is a real-life rocket technology that is sort of going through a lot of testing as a potential future interstellar or intersolar.
NASA got them on things.
So the idea basically is that you're going to ionize a fuel, like some gas like argon or something. So you're going to use lots of power to create this ionized plasma, and this is going to generate loads and loads and loads of heat, and then you will accelerate the plasma with really strong magnets to generate thrust. And so this kind of gives us a really good basis to make all the thrusters work off of this. So if we have a sort of defined thrust capacity for thrusters, and this is their performance effectively, right? This is the amount of newtons they can give out, and then we draw power and generate heat and generate thrust based on this fiction, we can kind of make this a really systemic, believable system that sort of works under some future version of a real thrust system. So we'll take a look at this.
So we're going to look at this in action. We do a lot of this by looking at the MFDs, just because it's a really clear way of showing it in a presentation format. So as you can see now, every thruster has a little item on the power UI, and they draw power dynamically as the thrust is given to them to move the ship. Fuel is the same as this. Just imagine the power, but replace fuel, it's the same. And as you're flying around here, you can see your main thrusters going up, using more power. The heat goes up as well with them. Now I'm stopping, so the retros went up there. Let's have a look what happens. Like some of the other systems we have in the game, you can move the power around, so let's have a look at that. So you can manually underpower or overpower each thruster, and your ship's going to behave accordingly. So here I've reduced the power capacity on the rear thrusters, and this also affects heat as well. So if you're underpowering thrusters, they're going to generate less heat. Afterburner is actually just a facet of this system. It's just a shortcut straight into overpower mode. And overclocking is then another level on top of this, where you get that extra performance, you get more heat, more wear, and it's all systemic. They all just work together. Underpowered thrusters burn less fuel, overpowered ones generate more heat. If you're running low on fuel, you can throttle your thrusters down to just eke out that more performance. And this is all part of a system to give us consequences to your actions. At the moment in game, you can just fly around to your heart's content and go, oh, I've run out of fuel, I'll just go to Cryastra and get a bit more fuel.
Yep.
My ship's hot, don't care.
It's not really as interesting as it could be, I think.
Yeah, so this gives us those consequences. So let's have a look.
So this is what I was saying earlier with the consequence to taping down boosts. So if you do that, what will happen is your thrusters will start overheating. And the more and more you do that, the thrusters are going to wear out and they're going to get damaged. So immediately, if you start overheating, we're not going to cut out your thruster. I think that's a bit mean. But we will immediately have the thrusters start struggling to give the thrust that it can. And you'll feel this is simulated dynamically on all the thrusters, right? So if you, for example, are overheating specifically your front left maneuver thruster, you're actually going to feel the ship is becoming imbalanced, and you're going to have...
If you have a penchant for like strafing left everywhere in the game,
yeah, exactly.
that side's going to suffer.
So you will actually feel that the ship is not thrusting to the left as strong as it is to the right because you've been overheating the thrusters on the right too much. So we'll take a look at this. So right now, you're flying around perfectly normally, and then you press shift to afterburn, and you'll see you're getting overpowered here. Now, for the sake of showing this, we've massively increased the wear number. So the wear number is that middle number, that's number 15 in the middle of the thrusters. So you overheat your thrusters too much, that number is going to start going up. Again, don't worry, it's faster here than it will be in the game. And you can see that the thrusters are starting to not use as much power as they were. I think that the ideal behavior here is that they actually draw as much power as they would have, but you're just not getting the same amount of thrust out of the thruster. So you continue afterburning like this, your thrusters get weaker and weaker and weaker, and you'll immediately start feeling the ship get more and more sluggish because you're just, you're damaging the thrusters by doing this.
So yeah, if you keep doing this, bad things are going to happen. The main visual cue of this is thruster misfires. Now, misfires are going to be things that happen on all items when they're getting worn and overheated. And for thrusters specifically, they're going to accidentally backfire like a car. Sometimes they're not going to respond when you want them to respond. They're generally going to make flight pretty unstable. We talked about changing thrusters out. Different thruster sets will have different grades. So if you want to invest the time to get some resources to get better thrusters, they've got a higher capacity for heat and a slower wear rate, they're going to have less misfires. If you cheap out and go for the bottom shelf items, then you're going to hit this more. You're going to experience this in game, your ship's going to be shaking around, feeling unresponsive. But generally, this is not something you want to happen second to second. This is you've worn your thrusters out. You've done lots of stuff for a long time,
Yep.
playing not very well,
Yep.
and this is the consequence to that.
Yep. Absolutely.
So we've got all these bad things. It'd be a bit unfair if we didn't give you a way to sort of manage this. So how do you control your thruster balance so you don't get them overheated and too worn? The acceleration controller that we talked about, Afterburner and the thrust strength system are your friend in these scenarios. So going back to this, if you look at the right side of the HUD, we're afterburning here. Lots and lots of heat is being generated here. So to manage that, I just bring the thrust capacity down really low, generates a lot less heat. As I bring it up, the power and heat go up in turn. Again, Afterburner is just a shortcut to overpowering. And this is where you're going to be managing stuff. And the great thing about this, you've got your throttle, you've got your afterburn, your throttle, your thrust capacity. You don't need to go in your MFDs, like flying around, doing this, trying to work out what's going on. You've got those two big items, center of your HUD. After a while, you're not even going to need to look at them. You're going to have worked out where to move them.
Sure.
It's just a shortcut to spending your life looking at little screens.
Yeah, absolutely.
But there's even more we can do here.
Straightforward enough. Since we simulate this, we can just push this to limit. We can say, hey, if someone shoots your thruster, we can start reducing its power output and its strength. And this is kind of this level of dynamic flight behavior we've just never had before. So we take a look at this inside the Freelancer. You're flying around, your thrusters are in perfect health, you got no problem. And so here, a Gladius is going to shoot some thrusters. It's already shot the one on the right there. The more and more you do this, you can see the thrusters starting to get damaged. And you will immediately feel this in the handling of the ship. So the idea here, so you can see these two thrusters have been damaged. If you try and move, you're just not going to get the strength out of them that you need. And the expectation here is that we want more interesting combat, so that, I think currently people just go straight for the cockpit if they know what they're doing.
Yeah.
But actually, it could actually be another strategy to go for the main thrusters of a ship, or even if you're good enough to hit the maneuver thrusters, you can cripple a ship so it can't even roll.
Yeah, at the moment it's very time to kill, and we've always talked about time to disable. You want to be able to board ships that you've taken out. At the moment you can't really do that, but this is a system that allows you to cripple that ship. You've got distortion weapons to do that. You can physically damage them. So It's all building up to that, grabbing hold of other ships.
Because the thrusters are drawing power so dynamically as well, if you, for example, take out the power plant of a ship, they're not going to be able to power any of their thrusters. The ship's going to be completely incapacitated. You just won't be able to move, which is pretty cool. So there's a bit more. I think this is a really important thing that we've done, is we've gone over every single ship in the game and rebalanced them and retuned how the ships fly. I feel like this is kind of a subtle thing for a lot of people, but I think for the people who really know the details of flying, this is a huge, huge deal. So what the goals here were to try and get some more variety between the ships and try and feel more momentum in the ships and feel more character between them. So we're going to go through and we're going to create like a systemic system for deciding what thrusters and what size of thrusters are going to get certain thrust capacities. And so that across all of the ships, we sort of have this unified balance of how ships feel and how they get thrust assigned to each direction.
Yeah, the momentum part is key here. Like at the moment in the game, maneuvering thrusters have like absurd amounts of power to them.
Yep.
And this changes that significantly.
In 3.3, there are actually ships that have like these tiny little maneuver thrusters and these giant main thrusters, and the maneuver thruster has more thrust than the mains. So no more of that. We're going to make this a lot better. So if we look at the Gladius has these two really big thrusters. Straight away, if I make a left turn, you can see how much more drift there is than there used to be. You really want to feel the momentum when you're moving a ship around. So I think the Gladius has quite a few thrusters that can point downward. So you will actually feel differences in trying to strafe in certain directions. And of course, the angular acceleration is also super important here. The layout of the Gladius's thrusters actually gives it more pitch authority than yaw. And so in this ship, that's going to be the dominant way. You're going to want to try and use your roll and pitch to get on target and hold the target in front of you. And that may not be what we have with other ships, right?
Variety and character.
Yeah, this variety is super, super important to us. So you can see in the outside view here, as you move around, it really, I can't stress how cool it feels to have this momentum. It really makes flying, it makes it arguably more difficult, but I think it's more rewarding when you fly really well, and that's really cool. So I think we will move on.
Pick a different ship.
Yeah, we'll move on to the Hornet.
So yeah, Hornet in comparison to the Gladius, much beefier, much heavier, and it has weaker directions in all other axes except for going forward. So it has that huge main engine. So far more acceleration going forwards, and it's shorter than the Gladius. So it actually has weaker pitch authority, but its yaw is much stronger. So if you only have those two ships, you're going to be flying them two completely different ways. You can fly them the same way. One's going to be worse at what you're doing than the other. So you need to learn and feel how those two ships behave and fly them accordingly. Again, very hard to see in a video. Recommend you go play this and see how it feels. I just want to do a tiny bit of audience participation at this point. How many of you have a Gladius? Stick your hands up.
It's not that many.
Not that many. How many of you have a Hornet?
It's a lot more.
Then let's look at another ship. How many people have an Aurora? That's a lot more. So yeah, the Aurora.
We'll take a look at the Aurora. So I think we've been kind of guilty of punishing the Aurora a bit too much, making it pretty much useless in combat. And you know, it's still a starter ship, so it's still not going to be anywhere near as good as the Gladius and the Hornet. But using this new system of assigning thruster strengths, we can actually have it give some strengths. Like one of the big strengths of the ship is that it's really, really light. It's much lighter than the Hornet. And so even though it has weaker thrusters overall, it actually has I think it actually has slightly more acceleration in some strafe directions than the Hornet. But it obviously sacrifices not even close to as powerful main thruster. And so, you know, in the Hornet, if you're going to be getting your back out and using the main thruster, you can't really do that as much in the Aurora. It's just not quite going to be as useful. We can also use the previous ship item 2.0 systems to make the Aurora not as useful, say, as a Hornet, because, you know, maybe you just can't distribute thrust well enough, or you just don't have the items to match with the Gladius.
This is the most popular ship in the game.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
We definitely didn't appreciate it enough in all the previous tunings. And
yeah, we don't want to nerf this ship for sure. It should still be useful, even though it's not as good as the better ships. So I think that is that. We also, to do all of this, we wanted to make a ship design tool, right? So we're going to actually try something slightly risky here and do a live demo.
As Chris said, there may be some crashes here, so...
There probably won't be some crashes, but we made this ship design tool. And what we wanted here was super fast iteration. You know, previously, when designing ship handling, we had to hand edit XML files and run console commands, and it was just kind of a pain. It took hours.
Way back years ago, as designers, to tune the ship, you had to go in each individual thruster XML and go put its force output in newtons.
Yep.
To do all those, then you had to reload the game, then you had to test it with no feedback on the times and the accelerations rate and go, yeah, that feels okay, or that feels terrible.
You know, Gimble Thrusters, because we have Gimble Thrusters, thrusters can give strength in lots of different directions, but not at the same time, right? And it makes it basically impossible for a designer to predict what the acceleration of a ship is going to be in each direction based on just setting the thrust capacity. So what we have now, if we run back to the editor, so here's the editor. So we have this new tool here, which is the IFCS editor tool, and this is going to allow us to do live editing. So we run in the game, I'm going to spawn a Gladius here.
It's interesting. Every studio has their own favorite ship. So
Yeah.
the US studios love to test everything on the Hornet. The UK loves to do it in the Gladius.
Okay, so we have these dev tools now, which we've never had before. So as I move around, we can see the thrust output and the gimbal direction on all of the thrusters while you fly around. And this level of information we've just never really had before. Now these big red and blue cross in the middle of the screen here, this is the thrust strength for linear thrust for this ship. So you can see you got 65.8 meters a second forward, minus 27 to the left and 27 to the right as well. So we have all the thrusters in a list here, right? So these are the thrusters. We can click on them, and they'll highlight where on the ship that is. And then we can actually hand edit the thrust capacities. So these are the main thrusters. If I make these 10, you can immediately see that the ship's handling, where the ship's forward acceleration has changed. If I try and accelerate forward, it's going to be a lot slower. And there's no reloading of the editor or anything. This is immediate. You immediately feel the difference.
We have a lot of ships in the game, so if we have to reload the editor every time we want to do it, it adds minutes times hundreds of ships. It gets very long.
So to go the opposite, why don't we take some of these thrusters at the front here, and we're just going to make them really strong. We're going to get, like, I don't know,
Got a great career in ship
100
balance
million,
coming up.
that'll do. So we now have 532,000 meters a second forward. So you can feel the difference in the roll is just immediate difference. We get up to speed really fast. So we have this live editing. Now, obviously, we mentioned earlier that hand editing thrust capacities is just kind of a no-no. I mean, you could do it, but it's basically impossible to guess what these what these accelerations are going to be. So to solve that, we have this calculator here. We can enter the ship's desired handling. So I'm actually going to put these back to a sensible number for a second. Is that right? There we go. So if I say we got 15 meters a second in the forward Y direction of the ship, if we just change this to 100.
And this is different from where we are at the moment, where it's all based off goal times.
Yep.
This is a different way of doing this.
So you enter in the desired acceleration, and you click Tune Ship, and it'll automatically calculate the thrust capacities of all the thrusters. And it will obviously, now you can see that the forward acceleration is now 100 meters a second. This obviously, not like you can sit and calculate that number on paper, but you'd just be insane to do that. I don't know why you'd want to do that. So we have this now, and again, you can see how live this is. It's literally taken me like seconds to change the handling of the ship. We also have all of this extra information here, so we can fly around the ship and monitor what it's doing. And this level of sort of interactive ship design is something we've just never had before. So this is really cool. We're going to jump back to our presentation. Here we go.
Here we go.
We'll skip past our backup video. We're going to take a look at atmospheric flight.
Yeah.
Fly down to a planet.
Pay close attention to the audio.
Yeah, the audio is fantastic here. So there we go, atmospheric flash.
Anybody notice anything different about what was shown there?
Well,
So, now got lift. So, in the current version of the game, we do simulate drag, but we never got around to implementing lift. So now we have lift and drag, and that is a huge, it's hard to
it's massive.
state how much of an improvement that is and a big change. It's what makes atmospheric flight different to space flight, rather than just being a diluted version of space flight. So the atmospheric flight system as a whole has had a huge amount of work done to it. Lift, drag, turbulence, they've all had some changes. So let's have a look at it in the Gladius.
Yeah, so we fly around in the Gladius, and we try and yaw. Immediately, you're going to feel torque on the ship trying to keep it into the wind, right? Obviously, if you hard yaw in a plane in real life, it's just not going to work, right? And then as you see, if we roll and pitch, you can actually turn so much faster. In fact, you can actually almost completely arrest the drift that you would get in space. So you see how hard we can turn. We actually start to black out. That's not blackout from the thrusters. That is blackout from the aerodynamic forces on the ship, which is not something you get in space. I think this change this has to flight. You can see this is someone like, well, it's me trying to yaw really hard, and you see how the ship like torques back into the wind. If you, for example, try and hover your ship and then accelerate to cruise speeds sideways, the ship will experience all these aerodynamic forces, and it'll actually pivot the ship back into the wind, just to sort of get this difference, right? The ships are obviously, like planes in real life, don't fly sideways. So
the Gladius is probably one of the closest ships we have to a modern day plane, so it has that huge lift area.
So let's compare this to another ship which is not nearly so aerodynamic.
Everyone's favorite, the Aurora. So the Aurora, it's a flying brick, really, isn't it? It's not really got much of a lift surface. So it flies a lot slower because it struggles to cut through the air. It's got a lot more instability, as you can see there. We're trying to yaw here, but it's just not doing it because it's hitting that wind and kicking back. Another downside to this, beyond that, the thrusters have to do a heck of a lot more work just to do this. So they're running hotter, they're consuming more fuel. Doesn't mean that it's like this all the time. You can get around this to an extent. Again, bring the thrust capacity down. You're going to be flying slower.
I should add that your thrusters are doing all this work when you have a super not aerodynamic ship. Like in the Gladius, you can actually fly along stable and turn your thrusters off, and the ship will glide, which obviously you can't do in the Aurora. You're going to have the thrusters working an awful lot more.
Yeah, you're going to go down pretty quickly with this.
Exactly.
So let's have a look at what's going on under the hood.
Yeah, so this is a little bit of debug stuff. You can see what's going on. So the red line is the drag, and it's obviously moving around because of some of the turbulence in the air. And you roll and pitch, and you get this sudden force of lift pulling the ship up. And this, unfortunately, we couldn't have aerodynamic flight at the Drake Virtual Training Facility today, but this difference is massive, right? If you try and strafe around and like circle strafe people in space, and you try and do that in atmosphere, it's going to go quite badly wrong for you. You need to really adjust your flight strategies in atmosphere, and the hope is that you're going to go into atmosphere, and atmospheric flight is going to be a bit more like planes, and that difference is going to be really, really drastic. And having that difference in gameplay is really, really exciting.
Yeah.
So we're also going to take a quick look at ship management.
Yeah. So again, how do you manage all this stuff in atmosphere? You got to keep your thrusters cool, use the correct amount of power. It's different to spaceflight again. So the thrusters now, this goes back to massively overpowered thrusters in the current game. They now either have to fight the atmosphere, or if you've got a less or more aerodynamic ship, not fight it.
Yep.
So let's have a look at how we manage that in game. Freelancer, not a particularly aerodynamic ship. It's in atmosphere here, going forwards. Hopefully we're going to look at the MFDs a bit in a second to see just how hot your thrusters are getting.
So if you look at the target velocity as well, you can see that the ship is not actually able to reach the target velocity, and that's because of the drag. So if you pump more power into your thrusters, you actually can increase your top speed in the atmosphere, because your terminal velocity is obviously going to be a bit higher.
Yeah. So what we've done here is we've reduced the thrust capacity down. You see the heat's sort of reached an equilibrium down, those two mains, it's at 350. Gone to overclock them now, and now we can hit that speed. We probably could keep ticking it up, but you're paying the price of more heat. So now my thrusters are overheating. So how do I stop that? Turn them off. The reheat's going away now. Probably best to turn off overclock as well, otherwise when you turn them back on, they're just going to go back into that cycle. Put them back in again. There you go, you've prevented yourself overheating. So yeah, that's looking at managing. I think we're a bit tight on time today.
We are.
So
we don't have enough time to go over everything, unfortunately, but there's been so many other changes to the flight system in the past year, and hopefully, like, we obviously can't have a 3-hour slot to keep talking about them, but we're going to go over a few of the other things briefly. I don't know if you've heard, we have completely new ship audio.
Every single ship and every single thruster.
Everything is completely new. You heard also the atmospheric sound is completely new. And we're really excited about this. This is actually like such a huge difference. It sounds so much better than it used to.
Yep, decoupled's had a lot of changes. Those of you who fly decoupled will obviously have much fun with all those bugs, swapping between the two modes, stuff not remembering itself. We've worked on all of those. Yep.
Going with that, dual stick flight, I think, is something that hasn't really had the attention that it needs. So we put a lot of effort into that to make that experience better. Obviously, the control changes we talked about earlier are hopefully trying to address some of those issues and make that experience.
We do have a couple of dual sticks in the
Yeah, you can try out some dual stick flying in the LAN area.
AI flight now uses exactly the same system, so we get lots of cool little stuff. Wingmen can, especially for Squadron, we've got all the wingmen that
wingmen
can just
can follow your ship now.
right
really
on
cool.
your wing, or just be slightly offset and they move with you. That's all.
A lot of the core AI flight systems have been heavily updated, and this is going to slowly trickle down into the AI flight behaviors to make significantly improved AI flight. We've also worked a lot on the core performance of the system. So hopefully having 80 ships in a level is going to not completely tank your frame rate. So we'll get some more frames per second out of that, and the whole system is a little bit lighter on the CPU, which is a huge improvement as well.
More ship design tools. So at the moment, the sort of knowledge for tweaking and tuning ships is very centralized. Something goes wrong, there's only a few people that can deal with it. We've got all these tools now that enable anyone to go in there and help out. You get that instant feedback like we saw in the editor. You know what you're doing. You don't have to sort of go into 5 million spreadsheets and look at some numbers and graphs to try and work out.
Yep.
It's all in
it's
editor, live edit, updates in real time. It's great.
So another thing that we can do now is swapping out your thrusters. This is a super exciting thing. It goes back to what we were talking about earlier in how the thrusters all have their own individual thrust capacity, which dynamically changes the ship's handling. So you can, for example, either swap out a whole set of thrusters, or you can swap out specific thrusters, and the handling of the ship will real-time change based on that.
Yeah. And some more UI updates as well. Obviously, we saw a new central HUD there that has those features on. Stuff we didn't talk about in there. There's a little G-force meter. Shows you G-force. That's back. Lots more planned.
So this will be coming out in 3.4. We weren't ready for 3.3, unfortunately. But there's still a few months before this happens, and we actually have some more things that we want to do. So Hoverbikes, huge deal. I think right now they just don't really feel great. And so we want to go over the handling of hoverbikes and really tune that experience and make that a lot more interesting. So it's more like you're close to the ground, tight control hoverbikes.
That speeder feel that everyone always wants. Networking. So obviously the network team have been super busy with OCS, bind, culling, serialized variables, everything. We need to get their support to finish off a few more things on the Ifcs side. Obviously, it's all based around the current system that will be out there in 3.3. There needs to be a lot of tweaks for 3.4 to get it all working nicely, but it does work, and if you go play it, you'll see that you're all in a server there, 6 on 6.
So really the thing that you all want us to work on, right, is ESP. We have already done a lot of work on ESP, but there's a lot more time, and the hope is that over the next few months, now that you're all sort of got to play this, we're going to spend a lot more time on ESP, and we're going to dial that experience in for 3.4, hopefully with your feedback as well. I think it's a feature that is very reliant on what the actual experience of a wide variety of players are. So we're going to spend a lot more time on that.
UI improvements, obviously it's not a great deal of good if you can't see or understand what's being presented to you. So we've got a lot of plans that we want to do there to make that much clearer.
Yep. On top of that, the landing and docking systems are also scheduled to get a lot more work. We want to make landing is not really great, and we want to make that a lot better. And the systems to help us do auto land and stuff are also going to work a lot with the docking system. So you can actually dock ships together and stuff, and that's going to work an awful lot better.
We need that for bigger ships like the Hull Sea, who need to dock to stations to be spawned and load everything, because obviously if they're full of cargo, they can't land. You can't land, you can't sell your cargo, so it all ties together.
So I think we're actually running over time. We're probably going to be asked to leave the stage at some point. So I think that about wraps it up for us.